This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Hey, Trey Kay here. And from West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories behind America's divides. Last month, I was in a studio recording voice tracks for Us and Them when a headline flashed across my phone. Charlie Kirk shot while speaking at Utah Valley University. My first reaction was shock and dread. I quickly scrolled through my phone looking for any word about his condition, telling myself that maybe he would survive. But deep down, I sensed that whatever happened next, this moment would become another flashpoint in America's culture war. When I learned Kirk had died, I posted a brief note on Facebook. I wrote, "I'm disturbed by the senseless killing of Charlie Kirk." While I disagreed with much of Kirk's worldview, I don't want to live in a country where assassination is seen as an acceptable answer for political disagreement. My Facebook feed lit up. Friends from across the political spectrum argued past one another, tallying sins and assigning blame. One thing that I learned from these exchanges is that many people who don't have an eye on conservative media didn't really know who Kirk was. And to be honest, I didn't either until we produced an episode about 2 years ago that featured his story. Back in 2023, we reported on the rise of conservative youth organizing. Watching Charlie Kirk's campus events, I saw a sharp debater, fast, disciplined, and purpose-driven. And more importantly, I learned how organizations around him built an infrastructure to recruit and mobilize young conservatives. Journalist Kyle Spencer helped us understand that machinery. Her book, Raising Them Right, traces a decades-long strategy to make courting young voters on the right a serious professional project, complete with training, messaging, and money. Today, we're rebroadcasting this conversation with Kyle Spencer, and you'll hear how this youth movement grew, why it has resonated, and what it tells us about the political landscape young Americans are inheriting.
I was on and off American campuses, and I saw a lot of activism, obviously, as most people know, happens on college campuses. But I started to see a lot of right-wing activism. And originally what I saw was these gun rights activists, these guys were standing behind these tables in flip-flops and shorts. They were trying to pass legislation that would allow guns to be legal on college campuses, basically so students would be able to carry guns to math class.
When Spencer asked who or what was behind this activism, she said many of the young people told her they were just doing it on their own, without any support from any political organizations.
And I just didn't believe that they were doing it on their own. And so I started to kind of do some work and start looking at reports and clubs and who's funding them. And I realized, some very adult groups were funding these pro-gun.
I'm just thinking, you were in college once, you probably saw guys wearing flip-flops and stuff like that. They were probably going to a fraternity keg party or something like that. You were thinking this effort, this initiative that they were engaging in was something that didn't seem like consistent with the type of people.
I mean, I kind of felt like these guys, I know these guys know where the local, the nearest KED party is. I don't think these guys know where the state legislator is. You know, I don't think that's happening here. So, that's why I started to get suspicious. And once I went down the rabbit hole, it was just kind of crazy, the amount of money that was being pumped onto these campuses. And I realized immediately that it wasn't just groups like the NRA or Gun Owners of America, but it was pro-life groups, and it was religious groups, and it was groups that supported skeletal government, and it was groups that deny that there's warming on the planet. So it was just across the board.
So, as I understand it, you did reporting for 4 years to make this book, and a lot of that time was embedded with several of these conservative youth groups. How did you gain access?
So once I discovered that there were so many of these groups out there, I wanted to figure out if there was some sort of base or somewhere that they were getting trained, and I found that. I found the Leadership Institute, which is an organization, or really a school, a political school that was started in the 70s and by a guy named Morton Blackwell.
You said that you kind of got to what you thought was the ground zero, or the center, and that was the Leadership Conference or Leadership Institute?
Yeah, it's the Leadership Institute, and it is a building outside of Washington, D.C., which is conference rooms where kids come, hundreds of kids come every year, thousands of kids a year, and they get trained on very granular stuff. It's very granular. And it's funny because when I was finally invited to go and I went, I thought the stuff was so incredibly boring because it was so specific. But these kids were mesmerized because this is what they were passionate about. But
so you're saying that it was incredibly specific. Give me an idea.
Yeah, I'll definitely give you ideas. So you need to have a lot of stuff on your table. You need to have signs that are clear, that are written in big letters. You need to have material to hand out. It's good to have candy, swag, anything you can give. And this is so interesting. You should not stand behind the table. You should stand in front of the table because you should look like you're actually wanting to engage people in conversation. You should be near a stairwell if you can be, because that means that you're going to have more. If you're like inside a student union, if you're near a stairwell, you'll get more traffic. You should have a smile on your face. I mean, on and on and on and on. And that's just one little lesson on how to open up a table on a college campus to recruit kids. There are lessons on how to write publicity, how to do an interview, how to raise money, how to run a campaign on your campus and or be a youth leader on a campaign somewhere in the country, how to run for school board.
How long has this institute been around?
So it's been around since the 70s, and Morton Blackwell started it after he was one of the many people who came to Washington, D.C. in the late 60s, early 70s, really trying to launch the new conservative movement. And that's what his contribution was to open this institute, to teach young people how to activate.
One of my first memories of a political divide was a textbook controversy that happened where I grew up in Kanawha County, West Virginia. New classroom language arts textbooks, introduced in the mid-1970s, were designed to help students learn about an increasingly global society and access ideas of diverse cultures. The debate split the community, with one side supporting updated textbooks and the other side fighting to keep them out of the schools. It fascinated me, and it was even the impetus for my Us and Them show. But one thing that always stood out to me about that time was just how organized folks on the right seemed to be. In the early 1970s, representatives of the then nascent Heritage Foundation were training adults at churches and community centers in the rural parts of my home county in West Virginia. According to Kyle Spencer, Morton Blackwell's Leadership Institute was doing the same thing, but focusing on young people, a demographic that's not typically viewed as conservative.
The thing that we see a lot on the right is that there's often fear and anxiety about young people not voting red. And so they put a lot more effort and a lot more money into trying to lure and recruit people with the idea, as one activist told me at a conference, that when people are young, they decide their politics. And that often what they decide early on is what they end up being for the rest of their life.
So you got to get them young?
You got to get them young. You got to get them young. And you got to get them young. And when you're a Republican, you got to be really aggressive about it because they're more likely to be Democrats. But I think that we as Democrats, progressives, have a distorted view of what percentage of young people really are Democrats. So 4 in 10 young people in 2020 voted for Trump. That's a lot of people. That's not, I think a lot of people think that like 95% of young people vote Democrat, or it's 90%, or maybe it's 80%. It's not.
So the Leadership Institute, it's been around since the 1970s. I mean, and lots of young people have gone through there and gotten political training. Are there notable alumni?
Yeah, I mean, any big conservative that you know today went through the Leadership Institute.
Like who?
Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Dinesh D'Souza, Mitch McConnell. Yeah, Mitch McConnell calls Morton Blackwell, who started the Leadership Institute, his professor. It is a very, very powerful institution inside the Republican Party.
The Leadership Institute is in Arlington, Virginia. Spencer says she knew if she wanted to understand how their training program works, she'd have to attend in person.
And I began a letter writing campaign asking the folks who ran the Leadership Institute if I could come and see one of their classes. And originally they were very hesitant and not interested, but I kept telling them something that was true, that I was fascinated by how well I thought they were training the kids that I was seeing on these college campuses, how impressed I was with this, and how eager I was to share this with other people.
Can you just walk me into what it's like to go to a training session? I mean, I want you to walk me into the building, take me into a session. What are they talking about?
So first of all, you go upstairs and you will inevitably pass a bust of Ronald Reagan. And you will find yourself, there's a little makeshift kitchen because these guys and gals spend hours and hours and hours inside these conference rooms. And so they get breakfast, they get lunch, they get dinner, they get snacks. And so it's a setup situation where they can learn, eat, learn, eat, learn, eat. And I found that kind of, when you see that, you think, oh gosh, this is the real deal. You know, they're really settled in here. You go into the conference room and there's young people are sitting in rows. And in the front row is a big bowl of candy and lots of books. There'll be biographies of Ronald Reagan, Ayn Rand books, lots of books that conservatives use as kind of Bibles. And what happens is these folks, elders in the conservative movement get up and they teach lessons. And when there's a question and answer period, they ask questions. And if somebody gets the answer right, they throw them either a book or they throw them a piece of candy. So this is a very kind of rapid fire situation. And so you might have for 20 minutes, someone will get up and tell you, how do you recruit people on Facebook? When you recruit them, when you send them text, what should be in the text? How many times should you text them? What should you say to make sure that they come to your event? Once you call them, what should your tone be when you're talking to them on the phone? That's just one little micro lesson that a person might learn. Another lesson might be, let's just talk about who are the different types of people that might be running a campaign. What types of conservatives are there, or what types of campaign workers? There might be the guy that likes to work behind the scenes. There might be somebody that likes to be up front. Identify these people, because when you're hiring people and picking volunteers, you need to know what types there are.
So you were saying they got the bowl of candy and they've got the books, and there are people, they're rapid fire asking questions, and if you answer the question correctly, you get a prize?
So if you answer the question correctly, you get a prize. The prize is they throw you a piece of candy, or they'll throw you a conservative book that's up at the front.
Spencer worked hard to convince these people to give her a front row seat to their training. But she says she and others were constantly reminded about who she was and what she was doing there.
So I sat there while this went on. Everybody knew I was the reporter, and they just kind of referred to me as the reporter. And I'll never forget at one point, somebody was going to throw a piece of candy at somebody who had answered the question right. And the candy kind of came in my direction, and someone said, "Oh, don't hit the reporter." And, the piece of candy hit me. But besides that, I found these young people they were driven, they were serious. They really wanted to talk about the things that they cared about. They all had business cards. They understood that I was writing a story about this, so they quickly began to give me their business cards because they wanted me to come and see them at conferences and on their campuses and whatnot.
Spencer wanted to learn about youth training for those with conservative values. But beyond that, she wanted to follow the lives of some of its rising stars. People like Charlie Kirk, who founded the group Turning Point USA. The nonprofit reports members on more than 3,500 high school and college campuses and says it's the fastest growing youth organization in the country. Its political affiliate, Turning Point Action, can do election work. Coming up after a break, we'll hear about the celebrities this movement has created. We'll also hear how this movement fits into the landscape of young people in politics.
There's a huge percentage of young people who are registered to vote but not registered with a party. And so some of these are reasons why a political party may not, or a campaign may not reach out to young people.
I'm Trey Kay, and you're listening to Us and Them. This program is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council and the CRC Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
Hey, it's Trey, and you're listening to Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. We're re-releasing an episode from our archives in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk on September 10th, 2025. Like a lot of Americans, before we reported the story, I didn't know really who he was. And on the day he was killed, many people still didn't. That's why we're bringing this episode back. Kyle Spencer's book, Raising Them Right, looks at the nation's ultra-conservative youth movement. When I was in college, the student clubs for young Republicans or young Democrats seemed kind of stuffy to me. I mean, picture young men or young women in ill-fitted suits trying to talk to their classmates about economics or foreign policy. According to Kyle Spencer, that's been an accurate stereotype for the past few decades. But not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, things really have changed a lot. And I'll say that, and even since I started working on the book, and even since I started following the young people that I followed. So one of the people that I followed was Charlie Kirk, who runs Turning Point USA.
Spencer says Turning Point USA is the largest conservative youth movement in the history of the United States. And its leader, Charlie Kirk, has been integral in changing what people picture when they think of young Republicans.
When he started out, he was really dealing with economic issues. So those were the things that really turned him on and excited him. Very classic conservative ideas about balancing the budget and low taxes and this type of thing. But what happened was, particularly after Trump got elected, the culture war issues began to take center stage. And so on college campuses, these groups on the right started to talk about issues around gender and race and really to stoke some of the same anxiety and rage that Trump was eliciting in people and really trying to create anxiety, particularly I saw among young white men on college campuses.
You mentioned Charlie Kirk, and he's one of the young conservatives that you follow through in your book. Can you just tell me a little bit about who he is and where did he come from?
So Charlie Kirk is a young man who grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and was at a high school that had turned majority minority. So he was essentially a minority as a white guy in his high school, and it was predominantly Black and Hispanic. In this high school, he became increasingly conservative. There was a huge Obama was very popular at this high school. He had pretty conservative ideas, and he didn't feel like he was able to express these ideas on his high school campus. And he eventually decided to start a club, which began right at the tail end of his high school years, and then he transformed it into Turning Point USA, which is now the largest conservative group in this country, and probably in the history, the youth group in the history of this country. It is enormous.
So it's the largest conservative youth group?
Yeah, but it really engages very directly with the establishment, with the conservative establishment, and with the Republican Party. Charlie Kirk was very tight with Trump. He's very, very tight with Tucker Carlson, very tight with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Carrie Lake. Those are the kinds of people that he spends a lot of time with.
Take me back to who he was in high school. I'm wondering, was he steeped in a conservative mindset?
Charlie Kirk came from, he was a geeky guy in high school, a kind of nerdy loner. Didn't have a lot of friends, was actually kind of an obnoxious kid. People didn't really like him very much. I found it very hard to find anyone who went to high school with him who had anything nice to say about him. And he had this kind of appreciation for being the oddball, for being the contrarian. And so as his politics evolved, he was also a kid who was one of those classic kids obsessed with politics, obsessed with the elections, obsessed with talking about whatever was going on the news he was interested in. And when he started his group, he really wanted to bring young people who were in their high schools and eventually on their college campuses feeling alienated by the progressives. And so that's how it sort of started. And this became an extremely popular thing for a lot of kids because it turns out a lot of young people, particularly young white men, feel very alienated on their college campuses, particularly if there's a lot of progressive activism going on around them. But the thing that's important to understand is that when Charlie Kirk started the group, he was a very, very magnetic guy, and he was also very good at raising money. And he was very good at the beginning of getting money from big donors. And so he could grow his group really quickly. And the more money he had, the more he could grow, the more he could get people, the more he could, be online and multiply.
He was raising money while he was in school?
When he finished high school, he decided not to go to college. He wanted to go to West Point, did not get in, thought about some other places, and then decided that he was going to grow his group. He had met a gentleman who he decided that really liked him and that wanted to work with him. And this guy's name was Bill Montgomery, and Bill Montgomery was kind of a Tea Party old geezer looking for sort of something to do, and heard Charlie speak somewhere at a political youth conference and was mesmerized and walked up to Charlie and said, "Charlie Kirk, you don't know me, but you can't go to college. You need to grow this group that you have, and let's do this together."
Kirk capitalized on the culture wars by tapping into the sense of alienation among young white men. But in addition, Spencer says he began to convince powerful people in the Republican Party to prioritize recruiting people of color who felt disenfranchised by the Democratic Party.
Charlie told donors very early on that Latinx, he didn't use the term Latinx, but that Latinx young people had fairly conservative ideas, many of them were religious, and that they were an easy fit for a conservative group and for the Republican Party. And the thing that's potent about that is that there's some kernel of truth to that. You can talk to Democratic operatives up and down, all over the country who will tell you that the Democratic Party hasn't put enough money into bringing Black voters into the party.
When you say that, I keep thinking, was it after the 2012 election where there was a post-mortem of the Republican Party at that point, and the idea was, the memo was, the analysis was that if this party does not connect with people of color, that if it just stays very white and male, that it doesn't have a very promising future.
Yeah.
It seems like Charlie Kirk must have gotten that memo.
Yeah, I mean, I think he got the memo, but I also think that what was interesting, sort of what happened, was it took a while for Republicans to understand that Trump could go around and say very racist, offensive things about Black and Hispanic people and still get Black and Hispanic voters to come to the polls for him, and that there could be that could coexist at the same time. And I think Charlie Kirk understood that too, that there could be ideas and there could be policies in the Republican Party and policies he supported that might actually be quite bad for Black and Hispanic students, and he could still lure them to his cause and to his side.
To Spencer, no one embodies that push more than Candace Owens. According to Spencer, Kirk helped launch Owens, a young Black woman, to the top of the charts when it comes to conservative pundits. Owens served as communications director for Turning Point, but since then has become an influential commentator and entrepreneur. Spencer decided to profile her in the book as well.
She's glamorous and she's tough and she's, acerbic, and she speaks a lot to the ways in which she thinks that the Democratic Party fails Black people. And in her estimation, the problem is that Democrats coddle Black voters, that social safety net programs are bad for Black communities, and that the message to Black communities is you guys need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and not rely on government. And the Democrats are trying to create a kind of dependency. They will give you things and promise you things, and then you will give them their vote, but they won't actually help you.
Spencer says Owens started out as a Democrat. Owens changed her ways after progressives criticized an anti-bullying website that she had created.
That criticism really, really stung, and she decided that it was partisan, that it was progressives coming after her, and she began to gravitate towards the right. And that was kind of the beginning. She then says that she was excited eventually by Trump and the way that he carried himself and the things that he was saying. And she, at some point, she starts doing these videos as in an effort to gain her notoriety. And one of the videos was a video of a skit, a kind of Saturday Night Live skit that she had come up with. She was a young woman who came home to tell her suburban parents that she was gay.
Mom, Dad, I'm a lesbian. I like girls. Oh, sweetheart. We always knew.
And they are over the moon, delighted, so happy, supportive beyond. And this is supposed to be funny because she then tells them,
oh, also, I think I might be a conservative. I don't understand.
And so the idea here is that progressive parents are overly enthusiastic about LGBTQ rights and very partisan and clouded about, openness around politics.
When I was poking around the web, I noticed that there's a picture of Candace with Kanye West, and they're wearing White Lives Matter shirts.
Yeah, so eventually Candace, who's really, really good at aligning herself with other celebrities and finding other celebrities to hang out with, met Kanye West and became friendly with him. And she's tootled around with him a lot. And she's had various, she had a sort of a small falling out with him at one point. But she most recently has been, tight with him and hanging with him. And yes, both of them wore this White Lives Matter shirt around, which I think for those folks who are on social media a lot know that they both got a lot of criticism for it.
I also read about a time when she and Charlie Kirk went to the United Kingdom to speak at an event for Turning Point UK. And at some point, she gets into a conversation where she is, I don't know exactly how it happens, but she's opining on Nazi Germany and the Third Reich.
once Candace kind of gets going, she is all over the place, talking everywhere and anywhere. And one of the places that she talks is this very Tony parlor in London at this very fancy club. And she is discussing, and she's being asked lots of questions about her views on this and that by these old school royal Brits. And a question rises about nationalism and what she thinks about nationalism. And of course, this is a time when, Britain was really dealing with its own issues around nationalism and its own kind of anxieties about foreigners and strangers in its country. So Candace proceeds to talk about how she thinks nationalism is good and that it's wrong to have all these issues around nationalism. And she then sort of finds herself talking about Hitler and World War II and his efforts to promote German nationality. And sooner or later, she starts to sound like she is really talking about how much she admires Hitler. And she muddles around and she kind of gets herself out of it. And this blows up eventually when this is discovered online in the United States, and she gets a lot of criticism for it. And she refuses to apologize. She says that she was misquoted, or her actually what she said was taken out of, rather that what she said was taken out of context. And, frankly, I think probably Candace Owens just has so little knowledge of what happened during World War II that she didn't even understand how offensive that comment would be.
Kyle Spencer's book tells the tale of a well-oiled conservative machine, finding ways to appeal to and organize young people. Accelerated by the intensifying culture wars of the last decade, we now see connections that 15 or 20 years ago might have seemed unbelievable, like black celebrities advocating for white nationalism. While Spencer focuses primarily on conservative youth organizing, young people are getting more and more engaged in politics across the political spectrum. Abby Kiesa is a researcher at Tufts University.
I think that there's been some culture change that has happened over the past 4 years. We could attribute that to many things, but it's really been driven by young people themselves. And young people in 2018 were taking to the streets, but they were also registering to vote. And we saw that happen in 2020 as well, during the summer of, pushback related to racial injustice. And some of those really considerable organizing moments that young people, orchestrated. And so, those types of conversations, whether or not young people agree with some of those movements or not, raise people's awareness about what's happening in my communities. What do I believe? What are my friends saying? And all of these little things are stepping stones to engagement.
Kiesa runs the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts. She says data show that big cultural moments related to political movements have an outsized impact on young people, well before they are old enough to vote.
All of these experiences and conversations that young people have before they reach 18 have a significant impact on what young people are going to do when they turn 18.
I'm curious if you have any data that measures how older generation and their political alignment, so I guess I'm talking about conservatives and progressives or liberals, how much they have in the past engaged or not engaged with the youth voter.
When we look at national data, we see things like, young people are more likely, amongst the young people who vote for Democratic candidates, right? We see that nationally, young people are more likely to support progressive policy areas and really be pushing things like around climate, for example.
Okay.
A traditional, obviously I know that there are conservative youth who are pushing around that. But when we look more closely at what's happening in states and what's happening in communities, the picture gets a lot more complicated. There were 6 or 7 states in both 2016 and 2020 where a plurality of young people voted for then candidate and then President Trump, right? There are communities where young people are more likely to be conservative or libertarian than progressive.
Kiesa says the trends around youth voting changed somewhat in Trump's 2016 victory. But she says there's a much bigger problem looming in the background. The failure of our own political system in general to make meaningful headway in getting young people to turn up on Election Day.
When we look at how political campaigns work, their incentives are to reach out to people who they know are going to vote for them. And there's two problems with that when it comes to youth participation. One, if you're just turning 18 or 19, you may not be registered to vote, right? And if you're not registered, if you're not on the voter file, you may not be contacted by some of these organizations. So that excludes some young people, unfortunately. The other thing is, if you haven't quite figured out where you're at politically yet, and if you haven't been exposed to these conversations before you reach 18 that we've been talking about, you may still be figuring out politics. You may not understand where different parties fit, right? Or why you would want to register with a party or not. There's a huge percentage of young people who are registered to vote but not registered with a party. And so some of these are reasons why a political party may not, or a campaign may not reach out to young people. There are some groups and some campaigns who have really figured out that young people have political power on both sides of the aisle. And there are some groups who are still using, some kind of old thinking about that. That either they think young people are liberal and they don't want to reach out to them, or they don't think young people participate or care about things.
I'm really struck by author Kyle Spencer's description of modern-day cable news pundits cutting their teeth at a pristine academy just outside the Washington, D.C. Beltway. The money connected to values and beliefs can play an enormous and often invisible role in our democratic society. But while money can fund power, it doesn't necessarily create a young monolith of voters leading the country into a singular conservative or progressive vision. Instead, I'm left with hope over the fact that Gen Z is showing up to vote. Voter turnout in America among 18 to 29-year-olds shot up in the 2020 election to 55%, a level of participation not seen since 1972. Clearly, some of the nation's next generation are standing up to be counted. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode is me, Trey Kay, and Kate Smith. Michael Lipton, Tristam Lozow, and Ahmad Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, and the CRC Foundation. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Please share them with us on our Facebook page or on Twitter @UsThemPodcast. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Hey, it's Trey, and you've been listening to an Encore episode of Us and Them, originally released in March of 2023. We chose to bring it back following the assassination of Charlie Kirk on September 10th, 2025. He's referenced in this story, and the context feels different now. Thanks for listening.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
From